You're listening to How to Win Friends and Save the Republic, a podcast from the National Association of Nonpartisan Reformers. I'm your host, Andy Moore. My guest today is John Gable. John was born in small-town America on the border of Tennessee and Kentucky. He received a bachelor's degree in philosophy from Vanderbilt University and an MBA from Duke University. John began his career in politics, both locally and nationally, where he worked at the highest levels of government. 3 U.S. senators, Howard Baker, Trent Lott, and Mitch McConnell, each of whom has served as Senate Majority Leader, as well as with the Republican National Committee and President George H.W. Bush. However, most of John's career has actually been in technology. He was on the original team for Microsoft Office, the original team for Mozilla at Netscape. He worked with Zone Alarm for Checkpoint software and founded Covey Corporation, which was an early provider of web-based applications and online collaboration. In 2012, John founded AllSides and currently still serves there as CEO. At AllSides, John and his team use technology to present news and issues from many angles and allow people to make up their own minds. Their mission is to free people from filter bubbles so they can better understand the world and each other. John often writes about bias, news media, polarization, and how technology impacts these things. You may have seen his recent writings published in the Christian Science Monitor, Huffington Post, and the Cook Political Report. His TED Talk with friend Joan Blades about filter bubbles has more than 1.3 million views. Welcome to the program, John Gable.
Thank you so much. So I feel suddenly very old after hearing all that
stuff. A moment to reflect back on where you've been, right? John, we like to ask all of our guests how they come to this work. And by this work, I mean democracy, honestly. But for you growing up there in rural America, were politics discussed in your home? Was that something that was valued by your family?
Definitely was in the family. My father got very involved in politics. He even ran for governor as a Republican in Kentucky, which was very blue at the time, right after Nixon resigned. So he had less than no chance of winning. So he thought that was wonderful because then he could say what he wanted, didn't have to worry about serving or anything. But yes, politics has always been part of the family, but not necessarily where I grew up. I was very lucky in that. I mean, I got to be in like the hills of Kentucky and real rural Kentucky when I was very young, and then in Frankfort, the capital, which is nobody had anything against Republicans there. They had just never met one before when I was growing up. But since I had that very rural background, but we were fortunate ourselves, and then my mom's family came from very intellectual New England. And was even in fairly wealthy areas up there, interacting with folks like that. We were kind of like the Green Acres, if you remember that show.
Yeah.
With the very fancy Zsa Zsa Gabor moving to a farm with her husband, except instead of farmers, we had coal miners when we were very young. But that gave me a great opportunity, accidentally, to really have a sense of how people really are in the most rural and the most urban, in the poorer areas, as well as the more wealthy areas. Because my mom's father was like teaching and was up in Bar Harbor where there were Rockefellers and stuff like that, to really dirt poor rural Kentucky. So that was probably, though I didn't realize it at the time, but since my heroes are a combination of very uneducated and very successful, well-to-do folks, I have a mixture of the way I see things. That's probably indirectly how I got to where I am right now.
Yeah, well, and it strikes me hearing your story, I'm thinking back to previous episodes with guests, and I suspect there is something about the upbringing of folks who see that kind of juxtaposition, right, of I won't say the two Americas, but different aspects of America, right? Whether it's conservative and liberal, whether it's New England and Appalachia, like whatever it looks like. I think a lot of the folks who work in democracy reform and this kind of work, bridge building, have experienced that themselves, and through that lens see value, right? And across the spectrum. And at some point we decide to make this our profession, right? Is to try to promote that breadth of American experience, so that people understand that there's more to it than just your life that you happen to grow up in. And we'll talk more about filter bubbles in just a minute, because I think that's exactly where we get to. So you went to college and then started working in politics first, right? You didn't get into technology until later. How did you get into politics, and what was it that attracted you to that field?
Well, I had the opportunity to work for Howard Baker, the Senate Majority Leader. He was the Majority Leader at the time, as a high school intern, and he was really known in DC for getting like somebody on the left and somebody on the right, a Democrat and Republican in the same room, having them talk about an issue. And then he repeat their points of view in such a way that they kind of accidentally discovered how they agreed. And a lot of what happened, actually in the Senate when Reagan became president, was a lot of that happening, where because Howard Baker was the head of the Senate at the time. And so a lot of the things that we see as a big transition time back then happened, a lot of that kind of personal relationship, listening with each other. And he impressed the heck out of me. And I am a little bit egocentric. I want to make the world a better place. And I think I'm egocentric enough to think that I can do it in some small way. And politics at first seemed to be the way to do that. But I used a lot of technology in politics. Back then, it wasn't, technology is always whatever it is at the time. I had a small 2-door car, and I had like a big laser printer in my Mac that I drove around up and down the Southeast with. And I was using what was then cutting edge technology to do different things. And so the technology excitement caught me up. And then I thought that one day I should get a real job. I wasn't sure politics was a real job at the time. And so I ended up going to business school, and that brought me into technology and up at Microsoft, because I was using technology in real needs. And and I've actually found, just to short circuit it a little bit, I think I had more impact on the world with the original Office team, even though I was only there for a relatively short time. And then particularly at Netscape, when I was the lead product manager for that team, I think I had more impact on society there than I did when I was working full-time in politics.
That's a funny reality to wrestle with, right? Where you're like, oh, well, what am I doing here exactly? But you're right. And, to go back to when you're in Netscape, who would have guessed, right, that we would here 30 years later be talking to one another through a web browser, recording podcasts literally every day, that our entire life revolves around the web browser. And who's to say, maybe the world will revolve around something political in 30 years. Hopefully, maybe a tool to bring us all together, like All Sides. So you started All Sides in 2012 or thereabouts. And when you founded it, did you set out from the beginning to have it be like a news website?
We really started more as the problem we saw was the internet's broken. So early on, and I actually gave a speech back, this January, it's going to be 25 years ago, so it gets you feel old again. But back then, we were trying to figure out, what would the internet be like? What will it actually impact on society be? And I was reading books like Amusing Ourselves to Death by Neil Postman. You may be familiar with that.
Yeah.
And I was reading about how the change from the written word and to TV as a way of getting news, how that had an impact on society. And I was saying, well, what's the impact of the internet going to be? And I totally drank the Kool-Aid about how the internet could empower us. But our whole idea was that we'd be able to have access to more and better information, make better decisions. We'd be able to know people across the world as individuals, not as stereotypes, but as real people. And I think in a lot of ways, the internet's done that. But I thought back then that because it was so, this person's similar to that person, or this idea is related to that idea, I saw a lot of metaphor thinking, which leads to stereotypes. And so I thought back then that the internet teach us new ways to discriminate against each other. And that's the phrase I used back then. We now talk about filter bubbles and other things, but I've been worried about that for a while. And I thought it was so bad in politics in particular, So before 2012, the Romney-Obama campaign, I thought was so not interested in persuading the other and just getting one side more riled up than the other. That back then, that's what I thought. That I thought I had to quit my job immediately. I couldn't wait any longer. And we started building prototypes in 2012. And we really thought we'd be a technology company, but we didn't know if we were just going to be a technology company or if we were going to be a news destination. I didn't think being a news destination was realistic at the time. But we created this online website as kind of a demonstration to media companies that said, oh, wow, to be balanced and show left, center, right, that's a good thing. That's what they'd say. But when push came to shove, they weren't interested in all sides. They were interested in their side. And so that business model didn't work out back then. And during that time, people discovered, kind of accidentally, we did a little PR, but nothing much, our website, particularly schools and school librarians. And they are the most incestuous group you've ever met. And suddenly, without us doing any marketing, we were being used by schools across the nation. We started a little schools program and found that we were already being used in like 23, 25 states. We've been in all 50 states for some time now. And then people began to push back against the media that was getting more and more polarized. And so now we're not just a technology company, but we are a media destination. I mean, we had 22 million views in January across our different networks. Where if you think about other news organizations in terms of traffic just to the web, we're larger than Christian Science Monitor and American Spectator and Jacobin, but we're still kind of medium sized like that. But we actually didn't set out to be in journalism. We set out to fix the information flow online and then the relationship flow online. And we just saw that news and politics was the place where that was needed the most.
Yeah. Well, and you know, I think about all sides, and maybe I'm wrong in this, but when I think about it, I think of it as a news aggregator, right? That back in the early 2000s, I was a frequent reader of Fark.com, which was
Yes.
also a news aggregator, right? And you could categorize the stories with some humor and different tags. And so in a similar but very different way, All Sides does that by categorizing articles based on their partisan lean, right? So you and I maybe not just articles, but also the publisher themselves. And so if you're the reader, you can come to the website and find let's say perspectives on the infrastructure bill that was recently passed, right? And you might read a report from the left, the right, one that's more balanced but slightly askew a little bit, and you put that right on the front of it, the label, so that as the reader, you kind of know where this perspective is coming from, and that like meta analysis helps inform how you interpret what is written in that article.
Yes, and our thinking, I mean, if you look at my career, I've always been building technology that empowers people. And that's actually the way we saw All Sides. So though we look like a news aggregator, there's a lot of technology behind it. And we're very focused on empowering the reader to understand the situation and decide for themselves. So some people are all excited. Oh, look at the left side, then the right side, then the center side. We kind of show them together because we want to discourage people going down to just one filter bubble or the other or one perspective. And by doing that, we empower people. And so you almost can't get to the right side without seeing the headlines from the left and the center as well, or vice versa. And what we discovered is that frequently when you just see the headlines of a controversial news item, the headlines are so different that frequently reading those three headlines tell you more about the story than reading any one article all the way through if it's a very long article. It's
Right.
stunning how often that is true. Yeah, and it's just kind of empowers people to quickly find out what's going on. And I know the empower word's kind of a boring word, but it's really the way we think about it. We're enabling people to understand what's going on around them and also to talk to people different than they are so that they can get a better understanding. We are very much not trying to be the ministry of truth, which I think all news organizations have a tendency to go towards, because when you spend all your time writing, you can't help but as a human being to begin to think you're an expert, even though you're writing about 80 different topics or you only have your own view. And so we're helping people get through that. And we're helping people get to the reality of the situation, or really the reality isn't really the way to say it. I think it's more the breadth of the situation and all the perspectives of the situation. so that people really are able to decide on their own, as opposed to being really led down one path or the other.
We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back after a word from some of our sponsors. If you're interested in learning how to win friends and save the Republic, then you should know about Reformers Unite, a new virtual networking event hosted by NANNER, the National Association of Nonpartisan Reformers. Each month, NANNER sets aside a couple of hours solely dedicated to helping our members share updates about their organizations and to build deeper connections between NANNER members throughout the country. Reformers Unite happens on Fridays and is only available to NANNER members. So get on over to nonpartisanreformers.org and become a member today. Are you tired of the politics of division and deadlock? Do you want to do something about it, but you don't know where to start? CitizenConnect.us is your way to learn about and engage with over 400 organizations who are dedicated to helping Americans right, left, and center work together to heal our democracy. Find the organization or event that speaks to you and help us get back to making our great nation work, because it only works when we work together. Learn more at CitizenConnect.us. All right, and now back to the show. You mentioned how often the headlines are very different, right? And I also think that the reverse is true. And what I find fascinating is when headlines are very similar, right? From between things. So right now we're recording this on December 3rd, and I'm looking at the page. And so the top story, of course, is the jobs report from this morning. And it says from the left, which was CNN Business, America added a disappointing 210,000 jobs in November. And then on the other side, from the right, from the National Review, November jobs report falls well short of expectations. And so if you just, as a reader, you just glance at it, you're like, okay, well, here's what I know. The jobs report was short. And everyone's disappointed by it. And maybe that also helps you gauge public sentiment. Like, oh, this is something that all Americans agree on. These numbers were terrible.
Yeah, and that's frankly, particularly for jobs reports, because that's every month. And we see that if you look at past jobs reports, frequently the headlines are most different on this. So the fact that it is similar is like, yeah, okay, I actually believe there was a disappointing November.
Yeah.
But often it's like, well, like one group say, we added all these, and another group says, so it's so far less shorter expectations. So the way the different organizations frame it is frequently very different. And the fact that it is here is like, okay, I mean, it's interesting. And part of seeing those labels, which sometimes we are like so happy to share the label because we don't want to get people thinking in that label term, but it does lend an instant sense of credibility and reliability to what you're saying, because you can kind of really see what it is. I mean, our goal is to present the best arguments from the different sides. And so that it's not like just getting the other side in its worst possible way so you can prove that I'm right and they were wrong, which is frankly what you see a lot. But really trying to put all sides. Oh, sorry to keep. It is a good name because you kind of use it by mistake. But we really try to present the different perspectives for people to understand.
Yeah. Now, do you all limit yourselves to just those kind of national news outlets like CNN, National Review, and those things, or is there do you have a branch arm that dabbles in local reporting at all?
Well, we do have over 800 sources rated right now, and that actually turns out to be more valuable than I actually initially realized. I thought that our bias ratings, we have a whole patented system and other kinds of technologies we use to rate sources in a way that, so it's as if everybody in America looked at the content, didn't know who the brand was. That's kind of what our ratings reveal. It's a long system to get there, but that's a shortcut to what we really do. What's interesting is those ratings themselves turn out to be more valuable to people. They found that to be very helpful media literacy, if you will. We use them as a way to automatically show different views. And sometimes it's from larger news organizations like the Jobs Report, or a lot of national news gets that. Sometimes it's smaller and more niche players. We are moving more towards local. We're not doing that yet, but we are definitely moving that direction. Our technology will enable us to go there. Ultimately, we'd love to have an all sides Michigan, an all sides Kentucky, an all sides Bay Area of San Francisco, and use our technology, which is kind of helps to curate it, as well as some people, because we find that last 10% being a human being to be very valuable. And we tend to have a mixture of people on the left and right being those people together. Nothing we write that's over a couple of paragraphs is not reviewed by people on multiple sides of the spectrum. So it's really that combination that we look for, and we're already going deep into different issues, and we are going deeper into different regions too.
Yeah. Well, I think this is really important because it is easy, right? It's easy because it takes less time to read or listen to one source and take that for gospel, right?
Yeah.
But we all know plenty of examples, right? If I walk downstairs and there's a broken glass and both my kids are sitting there and I ask them what happened, chances are they haven't got their story straight yet, and I'm going to get two very different reports on how this glass came to be broken, right? And they will likely blame the other person,
Yes.
even if neither one was involved. And that, I think, happens in politics all the time.
Actually happens so much in politics that your analogy is hilarious and absolutely on target.
It's for the last couple of years, I've worked on a anti-gerrymandering campaign here in my home state.
I worked in that back at the RNC back in the 80s. So I cared a great deal about that issue for a long time. Forgive the interruption, but like in the 80s, we were looking at California gerrymandering, and there was one district that had over 90 sides to it, and another district that was only contiguous at low tide. At high tide, it split in two.
I am still amazed at the egregiousness of some maps, even the maps being drawn today, right? If you look at, like last night, I was looking at Texas and Illinois, and just absolutely absurd districts in both places. Here in Oklahoma, we don't have enough congressional districts to get those weird shapes, but it doesn't mean that they were okay. But if you ask me or you ask the legislature who drew the maps about the process, we will both describe the same process using some similar terms, but on the whole, you'll get a very different perspective, right? Like the nuance is important. And I think, I don't know, for me over the last 4 or 5 years, as America has become more aware of this difference in how news is presented, I think we have to be more savvy, right? As consumers of that news, to ensure that you almost have to gauge your biased diet, right? How much that you consume. And maybe that's a good entree into discussing filter bubbles, which I think is a great term. One, because we all live in a bubble of some sort, right? And that bubble filters the information, the whether it's news, whether it's I think just perspectives, right? Like the restaurants you eat at, all of these things are filtered through one or more bubbles in which we live. John, tell us a little bit about how you see that playing into just our world, and specifically into all sides.
Yes, the filter bubbles is a good term, and it's not always. A lot of people think, well, people are just going to see what they agree with on purpose. A lot of it happens behind the scenes accidentally to people, whether you want to have that happen or not. And that's actually the more concerning problem. So essentially, there's just way too much information online, and way too much information in the world, way too many people in the world. And so we all have to filter it down somehow. And the internet technology in its current form, which I emphasize because it's changeable, is really filters it down to you in order to show you what you already agree with, or people just like you, or what's best marketed, what has the most money behind it. And that is a problem, because we could become there are some things we know about human nature, and it's been tested many ways. There's a recent, not that long ago, study in University of Colorado that tests the same thing in different ways. But essentially, any one of us, if we only see ideas only the ideas that we agree with, and we are only around people just like us, two things always happen. We become much more extreme in whatever we believe, and we become much less tolerant of any person or idea from a person that's different than us. And that is the driving force behind a lot of the division you see in America and extremism in America, not just in America, but worldwide. There are a lot of problems in America, like gerrymandering, that make the situation worse, and a lot of election things, which I think can be improved. But this is a worldwide phenomenon. It's really more like the printing press's impact on modern society. And if you look back then, you were talking about media literacy. It's a very big piece of it. So we tend to think of the printing press as starting the Enlightenment and wonderful things. But we forget that for 100 years, there was utter chaos of a lot of pornography, a lot of made up fake news, a lot of things that challenges authority. Authority fought back, and there were battles and inquisitions and horrible, painful things in our history. There's a lot of writing about how people's heads would be down in their phones, or in their books, like there are in their phones, not interacting with each other. The analogies are very, very similar to the way the internet and modern technologies change things. But we eventually got to a good place after the printing press, or a better place at least. After about 100 years, we had kind of a media literacy where people began to understand how to use that information differently and not necessarily believe everything they read or felt they had to go shoot or attack somebody because it said something bad in it. And there was also new technologies, libraries, incredible publishers. I think we have the same challenge here. We're in the middle of a really chaotic period of time. And a lot of times I talk with about all sides, a lot of companies we work with and nonprofits we work with. It's really our job to get that 100 years down to about 20. And because technology could change earlier, but that does include media literacy. People need to understand this is no longer the time of Walter Cronkite, and this is the way it is, which wasn't perfect in itself, but there's not really the sense of, oh, I should trust the press. You should find different information, recognize that every different item, press or writer has different perspectives, and understand it yourself. We make that much easier and faster to do, and other technologies and people are doing that. But it's a combination of that media literacy and technologies that make it easier that I think will get us through this chaotic time to a much better place. And that's what we really want to do.
Yeah, I read an article a while back about people of a certain age who are, we'll call them digital natives, right? So I guess I fit in that. I'm 40, and so I've grown up with the internet. I'm in the in between the Zennials, right, who are kind of on the edge of Gen X and millennials. And so I've grown up with the internet my whole life, and my dad worked in tech my whole life. So we've had a computer at home since our laptops took up the whole table, and probably have been a little bit ahead of most folks my age. But when there was a study done about how users of the internet, how to phrase it, how users filter out advertisements, right? And what they can see, how quickly they can identify fake news or spam, phishing scams, those kinds of things. And it certainly lines up very nicely with age, right? So the younger you are, the more you've been accustomed to doing this, the more natural it is for you to just not even see ads. And then older users would see everything and would, I don't want to say fall for it more often, but they had a much more difficult time parsing out the good information from the bad. Yeah. And I thought, well, this explains, why it's difficult, like why my grandmother would have so many weird spam emails, and we were constantly having to, do antivirus stuff on her computer because she's like, I don't know, it told me that I had whatever. I was like, who told you? She's like, the computer, right? Oh, okay. And so if that's where we're coming from, right? Certainly a ton has changed in the last 10 years since you started All Sides. And as you said, the next 10 years will be even more important as we kind of speed through this evolution of news consumption, of internet usage, and the role that it plays in our lives. I think, I know a lot of people who are establishing boundaries with themselves of how much social media they use. Mm-hmm. They may be frustrated with the local paper, but they find additional value in the pace of consuming news from a piece of paper, right? That's different than just quickly scrolling through your Twitter feed. How does All Sides seek to help readers, users, move into or consume news in that kind of responsible way?
Yeah, that's a great way of thinking about the problem. Even back when I was working at Microsoft, and I was doing a lot of direct mail to get people to buy the product. And back when I was in politics and using campaign mailers, you kind of have different people interact with whatever medium you have in different ways. We used to talk about how there was a message you got with a letter when you first had it on the way to the trash can, or when you first opened it and then threw it away, or the people who read it deeply. And actually, a lot of interfaces, Excel and Netscape and browsers have this interface where there's a high level, and then you can go deeper and deeper and deeper. And we're designing all sides with that same kind of user interface in mind. So we want to provide people that quick view. Okay, like you saw on the November's jobs report, you can quickly see it missed expectations, unemployment rate drops. And then we write 2 paragraphs where we kind of quickly summarize the different ideas across it. So you want to read that, you can just read that. But you can also click on any of the articles and go deep. And you also find that when we show an article, we not only show the article from CNN or National Review or Associated Press in this case, but also other articles on the same topic. And we even link you to, like, we have a red-blue dictionary that defines terms, the ways that somebody on the left and the right might respond to the same term differently. So we give you all sorts of layers of going deeper into the language, into that particular issue, because you can also show you all the different blogs and news articles, not just from us, but from across the web on that topic. And so we're really designing it to do that, so people can get a quick, balanced view and a deeper view. And then we even now include something called Discuss and Debate, where we provide you events, online events you can join to discuss it with people. Now, not everybody's going to go all the way down to that. But some people I'm not interested in the Maxwell or Jeffrey Epstein world, but I'm very interested in employment. So you might dig into one area and not another. And we just make that possible. There's this misconception out there that people don't want reliable, balanced news. They only want that biased stuff that supports them. Now, Pew Research, according to their studies, say that 78% of news readers say they prefer news from a source that's not that slanted. And that, by the way, is a huge increase from 2 years before that was only 62%. So I see there is a palatable, measurable revolt against the direction that news has been going recently. And then you also give people those opportunities. We get more page views per visitor than other news organizations because they do look at the other sides. They do dig deeper because they have that opportunity. But some issues I don't care about. I just kind of look at it quickly or otherwise. So we very much think about that. But we also do a lot on Instagram. We have over 200,000 followers on Instagram. We're on All Sites Now there, and as well as in Twitter and Facebook. We have newsletters. We have an app that a lot of people use. And in each case, we provide people different ways of getting there. We're trying to bring the news to where people are rather than make them go somewhere else, and then provide like a good user interface, your ability to get as much or as little from it as you like.
That's really interesting. And I can imagine, I mean, in the last 10 years, the rise of social media has had a tremendous influence on how news is delivered, how it's consumed, and in some ways, what is considered news, right? There's a very different, I think, tone in my Twitter feed, even from journalists, than from journalists I know personally who just don't use Twitter, right? Like they relate to the world in a different way. And as I think we often say, it bears repeating that Twitter is not real life, right? It is a aspect of it, but it is not the whole story. So, well, John, as we kind of wind down, what's next for All Sides? Anything coming up or important that you want our listeners to be on the lookout for?
Well, what we're looking to do is finding ways to have a greater impact, provide this opportunity to more people. So we are about empowering regular people so they can have a more dynamic, healthy democratic society, a healthier republic, because there are challenges that we're dealing with right now. And so what we're doing is actually we're actually not only a news service, but we're also a technology service to major news organizations. We're working with them to help actually give their journalists tools so they can more quickly see all the perspectives around an issue, because some of the bias is just a matter of time. They just don't know that much. They don't have time to know that much. So they only know what their little niche of people know, which tends to be biased just by what they know and what they don't know. So we're looking at more of that impact, but we actually were not interested in becoming a destination at first, but we truly are now. And so we're really going to be growing our outreach and our users and just getting in front of more people. Schools love us. We're growing a huge amount in schools, and that's a part of the media literacy you need. But we're finding that also is valuable to adults as well. And the thing I don't know how much we'll be doing, but we'll be doing this again this year, or in 2022. We did it in this current year, is something called America Talks, where we actually use more technology to automatically mismatch people on different sides of the political spectrum, socioeconomic and geographically, in video conversations with each other on topics so they can understand each other. So we're really focused on bridging that divide, if you will, or really just freeing people from a too narrow view, both in the information and the relationship. And we're going a few different routes there. And we're looking for partners in locally as well as on the national level to help us grow there. And we do a lot with nonprofits, a lot with some media companies. And this next year is going to be kind of a wild ride, frankly.
Yeah, that sounds like it. Well, that's very exciting. John, thanks so much for being here with us today.
Well, I appreciate this and what you're doing with the podcast in general. I love your focus and your thinking, and it's nice to be part of that.
Appreciate that. My guest today has been John Gable with All Sides. You can check them out and learn more at allsides.com or follow them on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at All Sides Now across all 3 platforms. Thanks for listening to How to Win Friends and Save the Republic. This podcast is a program of the National Association of Nonpartisan Reformers. For more information about our organization and how you can join, please visit our website at nonpartisanreformers.org.